You're standing on a narrow stone street in Pompeii, and a cartwheel has worn a groove so deep into the rock that your sandal catches on it. This looks like an accident of erosion. It isn't. It's the fossil of a rule you've never heard of, and the truth goes back thousands of years, and it's stranger than you think. Look down again. That groove isn't random. It sits exactly the same distance from its twin groove on every street in the city. Someone measured this, someone enforced it. You are looking at the leftover bones of an ancient traffic system, built by people who never had a single traffic light, a single stop sign, or a single painted lane. And yet, they solved a problem that still chokes modern cities every single day. Imagine you're a merchant in Rome around 45 BC. Your cart is loaded with wine jars. You need to get across the city before dark. But you can't. Not because the streets are blocked, because the law says you're not allowed to. Wheeled vehicles were banned from the streets of Rome during daylight hours. Not most of them, nearly all of them. The city that built roads spanning an entire continent had at its own center a rule that sounds almost backwards to modern ears. Keep the carts out until the sun goes down. Why would the most advanced infrastructure builders of the ancient world choose to restrict their own wheels? The easy answer is noise and crowding. The real answer is deeper. Rome's streets weren't designed the way modern cities are designed, from the ground up for vehicles. They grew organically for centuries, narrow, twisting, packed tight with insulae, the multi-story apartment blocks where most Romans actually lived. By the time Rome had over 1 million residents, its ancient footpaths were being asked to carry cart traffic they were never built for. Something had to give. So the city gave up daytime cart traffic entirely and pushed it into the night instead. This wasn't an accident of decline. It was policy, and a strikingly specific one. The rule is recorded in a document historians call the Lex Julia Municipalis, and the Roman biographer Suetonius describes similar restrictions under Julius Caesar, banning wagons from the city center during the day. Read that again. An entire empire's capital, quietly rearranging its whole daily rhythm around wheeled traffic, more than 2,000 years before anyone coined the word rush hour. But the deeper evidence isn't in a scroll. It's carved into the stone itself, and this is where the story gets genuinely remarkable. The best proof comes not from Rome, but from Pompeii, the city famously buried and accidentally preserved by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Because Pompeii froze in a single moment, its streets still show the actual physical evidence of how ancient traffic behaved, not just how a law said it should behave. The archaeologist Eric Poehler spent years studying exactly this. He mapped the wheel ruts across Pompeii's street network, block by block, intersection by intersection. What he found wasn't chaos. It was a system. Some streets show ruts running in only one direction, worn deeper on one side than the other. Evidence of one-way traffic patterns centuries before anyone wrote the phrase, one-way street. Other intersections show raised stepping stones placed so pedestrians could cross without touching the mud and waste that pooled in the roadway, spaced with gaps precisely wide enough for a cart's wheels to pass straight through without stopping. Someone had engineered a crosswalk and a traffic lane into the exact same 3 feet of stone. Think about what that means. The people building these streets weren't guessing. They were solving the same problem every city planner solves today. How do you let carts, pedestrians, and deliveries share the same narrow space without gridlock or bodies underfoot? Poehler's research even suggests some streets were deliberately narrowed at certain points, essentially ancient speed bumps and choke points, forcing carts to slow down before entering busier intersections. This is traffic calming, built 2,000 years before the term existed. Here's the twist that changes how you should picture all of this. You'd assume the busiest, most important streets were the widest, the grandest, built for maximum traffic flow. It's often the opposite. Some of Pompeii's narrowest, most awkward streets show the heaviest wear, meaning they carried enormous daily traffic despite being barely wide enough for one cart at a time. Why funnel the most traffic through the tightest bottleneck? Because ancient Roman cities weren't optimizing for speed. They were optimizing for control. A narrow street is easier to monitor, easier to tax at a checkpoint, easier to close off if trouble breaks out. Some historians argue that certain street widths were kept deliberately tight near marketplaces and administrative buildings, not because Romans lacked the stone-cutting skill to make them wider, but because a tighter street meant slower carts, and slower carts meant fewer opportunities for smuggling goods past the tax officials stationed along the route. Your traffic jam wasn't always an engineering failure. Sometimes it was a feature, not a bug, generating revenue for the very city that caused it. That reframes the whole nighttime cart ban too. It wasn't purely about noise or clutter. Historians studying Rome's urban management point out that pushing cart traffic to nighttime also gave the city a way to control who moved goods, when, and past which checkpoints, since night traffic could be tracked by different city officials working different shifts. A rule that looks like simple noise control on the surface starts to look, underneath, like an entire logistics and tax system disguised as a curfew. There's more evidence buried in the everyday objects Romans left behind. Excavated cartwheel fragments recovered from sites like Pompeii and Herculaneum show remarkably consistent gauges, the distance between the two wheels. That consistency almost certainly wasn't accidental either, since carts had to fit through gates, arches, and those famous stepping stone gaps built into every intersection. A wheel gauge slightly too wide would mean a cart physically could not pass through certain streets at all. In other words, the infrastructure itself acted as a filter, quietly restricting which vehicles could go where, long before any human traffic officer needed to say a word. You can still feel the ghost of this system today, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you a little. Modern cities restrict delivery trucks to overnight hours in exactly the same logic Rome used 2,000 years ago, keeping heavy vehicles off streets during the hours when pedestrians dominate. Modern cities build narrow, deliberately awkward streets in historic districts specifically to slow traffic down, the same choke point trick carved into Pompeii's stone. Modern cities use congestion pricing, charging vehicles more to enter busy zones at busy times, an idea that isn't far at all from a Roman checkpoint tax on carts squeezed through a narrow, deliberately tight street. None of this was preserved because anyone thought it mattered. It survived by accident, buried under volcanic ash, carved by the simple daily grinding of 10,000 cartwheels against soft limestone. Nobody in Pompeii was building a monument to their traffic system. They were just trying to get their wine and grain across town before dark, same as anyone stuck in traffic today, same as anyone glancing at a clock and wondering if they'll make it home before the roads fill up again. So the next time you're sitting in your own gridlock, inching forward behind a delivery truck that isn't supposed to be on this street until after dark, remember the groove worn into that stone in Pompeii. Someone stood exactly where you're sitting now, frustrated by exactly the same problem, 2,000 years before you were born. The truth was never that ancient people lacked the tools to solve traffic. It's that the problem never actually went away. It just changed its wheels.